Welcome to Access Your Leadership, where we share inspiring career stories and talk about ways you can level up your own leadership potential. I'm your host and coach, Hakeem Lokhtar, and today I'm here with Rachel Platt. Rachel is the founder and CEO of PLATTinum Consulting, where she collaborates with leaders of small and mid-sized businesses and existing HR teams to develop and execute strategic people projects. Rachel, so glad to have you here.
I'm so glad we get to chat today, Hakeem. It's
I'm
going to be
looking
great.
forward to it. And before we get into the conversation, as you know, I love to start every episode with a leadership win. So, what is a leadership win for you, personal or professional, that you'd love to share today?
So I think I have two. These are the things that if I could put them with a star on my refrigerator, they're the things that I look back on and that I'm just proud of. And so one is in people strategy and human resources. Unfortunately, sometimes it's my job to let someone go. And about 6 months after I let someone go, and it was difficult, it was somebody who had been with the organization for a good period of time, I got a thank you note from them. And that note was just beyond thank you for treating me with respect and dignity during a very, very difficult time in my life. But more than that, the note was really about thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself and for putting me on the path to what really is and should be my career trajectory. And that just had so much meaning for me because it was about having taken the time to talk to people, to understand what they were passionate about and where the gap was between what their work was and where they really saw themselves. And this person has gone on to do amazing, incredible things. And while I was part of one of the worst days, I helped to put them on the path to one of their best days.
Oh,
So
that's
that
great.
is something, a leadership learning for
Mm,
all of us, that if you do things in the right way, that you are really giving sometimes a gift to someone else to rethink, to refocus on what their aspirations are.
I want to hear the second one, but it just reminds me of a quote that I remember hearing at a conference when I was working at HLS. And I think about it all the time, and it was never be afraid to talk to your new employee on their first day of work about their last day at work.
The best.
And
I say that frequently, actually.
and and it's just such a great one because I always think about it in the context of like high performers, strong performers moving on. Oh, I want to keep them. They're such a strong, performer. They're so valuable. And then you just kind of want to hoard that talent, but not being afraid to let them go because they've either grown out of the role or they're moving on to do better things. But I love the example that you just gave, which just opened my mind even to that's relevant of all employees, all individuals at any level for any reason where they need to move on. It's the ability to have that conversation in a way that says, like, this isn't like the end of it all here. This
Right.
is just a conversation around why this isn't working out, or the conditions of the business, or whatever the reasons might be. And this doesn't devalue you and your potential to do bigger and better things elsewhere. And that coming from a place of real sincerity and care, like you described, because you were interested in what are you passionate about? What could you be doing? Because the situation right now has changed and it's no longer working. That's okay. This is just a conversation we're going to have. And then to have that thank you note 6 months later is such a, affirming thing to have happen. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, I have kept it, and I love that quote, and I have also heard it many, many times. There's another quote which is not a famous quote, but it is just a former boss of mine used to always say, employees are just a gift on loan. They come to you, they do work for you, they add and enhance and contribute to your business, your mission, and you also should be a gift for them.
Yeah.
They should leave with more skills, more contacts, more experiences. And if you are building a culture where you're constantly thinking that way and talking that way, really both parties, the employee, the team, the employer, really view each other in a positive gift way and wanting to leave the other better than how
Yeah.
they found them.
Yeah.
And
100%. Yeah.
uh,
That's why I always reference leadership being such a privilege,
yes,
to see that. And privilege is for what you get, but also for what you give.
yes,
Um, but I want to hear your second win, and then we're going to get into what you just sort of like teed up for us as our conversation, because I think that culture that you're describing is what I'm excited to talk about.
sounds great. So my other one, and I'm sure that a lot of people have had, is the feeling of identifying that someone really has so much more capability than how the organization is potentially currently using them or thinking about them. And this happened in a role where I was very involved in client experience. There was a little bit of an operations person who was hired, who actually was an architect. Their very last job had been building buildings, and they were brought in on a very short term, friend of a friend type situation just to do some operations work. But the attention to detail, the care, the concern, the level of questions that were being asked really sparked something that said, this is not your traditional background for someone in client experience, but her curiosity, her integrity, her desire to learn, her desire to provide excellent client service just said, we're going to give this a try, because you can teach the process, but you cannot always teach the desire, the heart. And that individual and a few others over the course of my career that have gone on to thrive and get promoted multiple times since then, you know, that to me is what makes being a leader rewarding. It's not what you get, it's what others around you get.
Hmm.
And I think that that's what people remember at the end of their careers. It's, who did I help? Who did I develop? Or at least that's what I want to remember. And the people I want to surround myself with,
Yeah.
that's what I want to be important to some of them. It's just,
Yeah.
how can you help others make a better life?
I love that. You hear people talk about the pride they take in finding talent, but it's not always finding talent in the way that's presented to you initially. It's seeing into a person and actually seeing what they possess in terms of their natural talents, but also, and what you were describing is what I think about the distinction between skill and will,
Absolutely. It's all
you
will and
know and I love that because there's a leadership training that what I offer, and in one of our first sessions, the leaders are there, and I said, what do you think your job is? And everyone's, rattles off all of these ideas about what their job is, to fix this and to respond to that and to make choices on this. And I said, your job as leaders, first and foremost, is to develop your people. That's your job. It's to develop your people and develop them, yes, in sort of their technical skill set, but to develop them as other leaders, leaders of themselves, leaders of their teammates, leaders of those beneath them, in terms of a direct reporting. And it's so important, I think, that you highlight that, because it's so easy just to plug people into these roles that we think they ought to go into, and then go back to our work and say, okay, great, check, 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 and not revisit those and say, are they thriving in this role? Is this aligned with who they are and what their skill set is, or natural skill set might be? So I think that's such a great segue into talking a little bit about you, because I want to learn a little bit more about how you got into the work you've gotten into, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the seeds you've planted in your initial sharing about how that impacts culture and learning organization and retention and things like that. So tell us a little bit about you, Rachel. Like, how did you get into the work that you're into now?
So it's interesting. I came to your podcast where you were talking about like growing up and your experiences getting into leadership. And some of ours are very similar in
Mm,
that, we grew up in loving households where there was a little bit of, when necessary, tough love, but for the most part, a lot of support and a lot of opportunity. And from a leadership standpoint, also sort of similar to you, I took on at a young age, middle school and high school, I was getting involved in certain clubs and I wanted to be a leader on the club. I'm not very good at sitting back.
yeah.
It's not that I'm a control freak, it's that like I want to be in the mix and I have ideas and that's how they get heard. And throughout college, very similar. And I knew early on, even though I couldn't articulate it, um, I thought that human resources would be a great path for me because I'm very curious about people. I'm curious about what makes them tick, why they do the things they do, why they don't do other things,
Yeah.
and how their career builds, enhances, or detracts from the rest of their life. And I was lucky, I started in recruiting. And similar to that story that I just told, I had a boss, I was recruiting, I was promoted at a very young age to manage a large team of people. I was young enough to be some of their kids. And I did that job for a while, was very successful until the VP one day sat me down and was like, "You're in the wrong job. You're in the wrong job, and I'm moving you to this other job." And like so many other people, I mean, talk about imposter syndrome. I didn't know what I was doing, but tried to be a quick study, tried to find some mentors to help me out, tried to read things, and definitely fake it till you make it. A little bit of that. And throughout my career in corporate, I was constantly seeking out and being sought for the project that was new, the project that was going to be tough, the project that was going to be like, we don't exactly know what we're doing, but we got to figure this one out. And I always really thrived on that environment. And I was aiming to be a chief people officer. And that was the pinnacle. And I took on that job, and it was the worst job I ever had.
Mm,
I don't know what I was thinking, whether it was the wrong organization, the wrong people to be doing it with, or the fact that I suddenly found myself so far away from the people and really feeling like I was having an impact. Like, yes, there was an impact on the business, but I was not getting the impact on the people.
mm,
And so, in 2018, when I started Platinum Consulting, where we really focus on people strategy, and I took what I learned from these big businesses and now I'm able to apply it to these smaller organizations and customize it to them and their culture and help to build their culture. All of a sudden, like it feels like everything has kind of come full circle. Like all of the pieces came together from my upbringing, from every boss that I've had who plucked me from here and stuck me on that awful project that I learned so much from, to the good days, to all of the different experiences. And now I get to put them in a blender and figure out what's going to work to make other organizations and other leaders be successful, even if the path doesn't look exactly like what you thought the path was going to
sure.
be.
It really
that
does. Yeah.
that learning to pivot um, is is really important.
What a great story. Yeah, I really feel all of those parallels that you were referencing because when the way I describe the feeling that I have when I'm doing what I do is it might be a little hokey, is I feel like I'm at home. I feel like, like it just feels like home to me. This feels like the right place. It's comfortable and it's clear that I'm doing exactly what I'm meant to be doing. based on all of my experiences, personal, professional, and the impact that you're describing, I think, is what no doubt makes you and your services so valuable. Is this is a people business, you know, and it's not this in what you and I do, but business
Business.
is people. And when you can, devote the necessary time and energy and focus and resources to ensuring that everybody's at their best or as close to it as they can be, then you start to really see things take off. And understandably, there are, people in various roles within an organization who are too close to it to see that. And also, whether it's a story or not, too consumed by the things that have to be done day to day to say, I don't have the time for this. Yes, I agree with you that it's important, but I don't have the time for it. To then have seen that yourself and even have reached the top, so to speak, and then see, oh, this isn't what I was hoping it would be. I want to make this more of what I want it to be. And I want to have the impact on the day to day, on the individual basis that I can have. It's a beautiful journey. Thanks for sharing that.
Agreed to all of that. Like, how lucky am I to be able
Mm,
to have the journey for myself? And how lucky am I now to be able to work with business leaders? Like, look, they're not HR specialists, they're not
right.
people specialists, they're accountants and lawyers and business owners, and like they do what they do. And so those that I work with, my goal is just to make them better overall holistically so that they can focus more of their time on what their passion and expertise is, but let's do it for not at the expense of your people.
That's right.
Let's allow you to do that with support behind you,
Yeah.
telling you, helping you, guiding you to say, here's how you build this culture that will have that exponential impact if
Yeah.
you're actually paying attention to your people strategy as opposed to keeping the trains running. And
Yeah.
that's the difference, frankly, in what Platinum does versus HR outsourcing. But that's what I find so exciting. And so I'm so lucky to be able to do it.
Yeah. I say it all the time. I feel like I have to pinch myself that I get to have these conversations and be a part of, this work. And I'm amazed, and I don't mean to generalize here, but I'm amazed by how many leaders, and I use this word intentionally and it's a little dramatic, but see the people part of their jobs as a burden
I've had people
versus
tell me it's the worst part of my job.
exactly.
What?
Versus leveraging it, like you were just describing, so that they can do more of what they love. Okay, that's okay. I'm not judging you for not loving that part of your job, but don't neglect it because you don't love it. Because if you do, it's going to only make things worse, or it's going to make it more work for you, or it's going to have the adverse effect versus actually leaning into that, whether it's you yourself or with a partner who loves this kind of work and is equipped and adept at, doing this kind of work to then say, I know how valuable this area of my business is. The people are my business. Let's get them in a good place. Take that off my plate a little bit. And then I can focus my energy elsewhere. I think that takes a certain kind of leader. And maybe this is a great segue into when you start to build a culture, there's a lot of leaders who feel like this is a massive shortcoming. I mean, there's a lot of judgment. We're getting a little deep here, but there's a lot of judgment even for leaders who say that's the worst part of my job, or that's the part I don't like at all, or my team is such a burden, or I don't want to. This is the one I hear all the time. I don't want to babysit people. And I was like, well, do you think they want to be babysat? Like, eh, so when you have that mentality, these are smart leaders, these are smart business owners. They know that there's something off about that. And then the judgment comes in, well, I wish I liked it more, I wish I was better at this. But if they get into like that sort of rut or that spiral, they end up oftentimes not doing anything about it. Maybe thinking about the seeing that not as a shortcoming but as an opportunity. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that because sort of in true Ryan Holiday fashion, the obstacle is the way. This is something where once you notice it, now we can do something about it,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, absolutely. And I would say that the most hated, if you will, hated aspect is performance management.
Mm,
And the reality is feedback is fuel. Feedback is fuel, and it's two-way feedback. Being clear and explicit with your team about what your expectations are, even if one of those is, I don't want to babysit you. I
mhm.
want you to come with three alternatives. I want you to, whatever it is. Uh, Brene Brown says, clear is kind. I'm going to lean into it. And I'm going to say that leaders who invest the time up front, and you can start this at any point. I mean, this is a tip for leaders. You can start at any point. It's never too late. It's sometimes maybe awkward if you've worked together for a very long time, but it is never too late to sit down and say to someone, tell me as a leader, as your leader, give me the feedback. What are the things that I could start doing that would help you to be more successful? What are the things that I need to stop doing that are creating roadblocks, creating obstacles, driving you up the wall, whatever the case may be? And what are the things that I need to continue doing?
Mm.
What do you value and appreciate? And you need, as the leader, to recognize that everyone on your team is not going to give you the same answers.
Right.
So you need to customize to the individual members, because what is something that is valued and appreciated by one may be the very same thing that is driving someone else crazy.
Yeah.
And that is, stop, start, continue is a gift that you can give yourself as a leader. That investment of time, an hour of your time to have that conversation, can save you dozens of hours on the back end from trying things, having to fix them, stepping on the proverbial landmines,
Mhm.
and like then having to recreate and reestablish the relationships.
Yeah.
And if you do that in a 2 by 2 format, meaning, hey, let's come into this plan, I'm going to talk about the things that I want you to stop, start, and continue. You talk about the things that you want me to stop, start, and continue. Let's come together on this. Oh my goodness, can you have success and impact that really magnifies like what's important and what your culture should be, and how you communicate with each other.
Yeah. I mean, talk about setting the tone from the top. If you're a leader, and we'll give Brene Brown another shout out. I mean, it takes real vulnerability to sit down and have that conversation, because also going back to this idea of embracing mistakes, there's sort of like a slight misnomer there, because at least for me, and I'm sure you probably share this same perspective, I don't see them as mistakes. I see them as opportunities. So embracing mistakes is almost like holding on to the idea that I've made a mistake, I've made a mistake, I've made a mistake, versus just seeing it as an opportunity. And a lot of the resistance, I imagine, well, I know this to be true just from conversations I've had with clients and other leaders, is, oh, it's too late, or it's too far gone, or it's not going to land. And they're just sort of like the story that they create around the quote unquote mistake they've made by not doing this sooner, or not establishing these expectations more clearly, whatever it might be. They just sort of kick that can down the road until it blows up into an HR matter, or worse, a legal matter or something like that. When, like you said, you could have invested, and I love start, stop, continue. I use that all the time. It's such an easy way just to say, look, I want to create an environment where you feel like we can have this conversation. And what an amazing way to build trust also, because showing up that vulnerably allows then someone to say, okay, this is a safe space that's been created. They're sharing with me. I'm sharing with them. Is this going to happen overnight? Is this going to be transformed, in one meeting? Probably not. But at least the conversation's been open. You've set that expectation. You've developed that sort of new standard for communicating that then, I mean, imagine that person walking out of that meeting and feeling like, wow, that was really refreshing. That was really nice to have that conversation, even if it was a bit intense or a bit intimidating because you didn't know, where the guardrails were perhaps in that first conversation. Just to know that that is available to you as an employee, you're going to share that with other people in the organization, and that's going to spread. And that contagious sort of, understanding of culture at that level is a
Contagious
beautiful thing.
trust.
Yes,
Building of trust and building
yes.
of, if a leader came to you and said, we should have had this conversation the first week that you started. We should have had this conversation last week. We should have had this conversation last year or 10 years ago. And I can't go back, but I can start and I can make it better
Mm,
now. I, look, is everyone going to get on board with that? No. But are most people? Because nobody comes to work wanting to do a bad job.
no,
People want to know what is expected of them and they want to do a good job. So give them the tools to
right,
do a good job. Give
right.
them the tools to make your life easier. I sometimes sit with leaders, and if I cannot get them on board with why they should do this because it's valuable to their organization, or why they should do this because it's valuable to the individual, I will go to, you should do this because this is going to save you time. You should do this because this could keep you out of court for some of the other
Mm-hmm.
things
Mm-hmm.
potentially you may have done.
Mm-hmm.
You should do this because you have aspirations in your career to do more, move in this direction. Well, guess what? You can't do those things unless you have built a team under you to take on more responsibility. Here are some of the ways that you can do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
usually, if nothing else has gotten through to them, the for selfish reasons, they still will do the right thing.
absolutely. And I'll add to that as sort of as a yes and to that, the maybe the less tangible benefit of that too is when you put your head down on the pillow at night,
Can you? Yes.
you can actually sleep peacefully. Because look, like you said, not everyone's going to respond to it the way that you hope they will. But that's on them. And that's not that you've done your part now. And I think, I mean, I get chills just talking about it because I think as leaders struggle, and this is why I love doing what I do, is to sort of peel back those layers. Like maybe you don't focus on this, maybe you think it doesn't bother you, but I guarantee you, you aren't sleeping as at night as peacefully as you could be because you know there's a conversation you ought to be having that you're not having. Or there's something that you should have said a year ago, a week ago, on Monday that you didn't say, and it's in there whether you focus on it or not. It's in there, and when you are able to have the conversations like you're describing, Rachel, it's so powerful because it releases you from this feeling of, am I being the leader I could be, or am I being the leader that my team needs me to be? Well, when you ask that question, what can I do to support you? Tell me, start, stop, continue. What are they? You're at least putting it out there. They can choose to run with it or not, but at least you've done your part as a leader. And maybe they have to sit and chew on it for a little bit. And then guess what? They come
Yes.
back to you at the end of the week. And they say, I was thinking about that conversation. I want to tell you how much I appreciated that. And there are a few things that I didn't mention in that meeting because I was a little like up in my head about it. But do you mind if I share them with you now or in our next meeting? Oh, by all means. I mean, that is what a culture thrives on, is a space, a psychologically safe space to be able to have those conversations in the way you described.
I don't want to derail us, but I have to say that it is a technique that also can work in your personal life, in your
100%.
relationships with family members, friends, your spouse, significant other, um, even with your kids at some level.
Absolutely.
Um, Having those understandings, it really can have such a tremendous peaceful
Yes.
impact,
Yes.
to get people to an understanding. And it really can be dramatic
It
Um,
is. It is. And I tell my clients all the time, these are not leadership lessons. These are lessons for life.
Life lessons,
You
yes.
know, they really, really are. I'm not sitting here teaching you leadership skill one, leadership skill two, specific to you and, employee number one, two, and three. These are life lessons. These are ways that you can interact with people in your networking group, in your family, at the holidays. I mean, like, if this is why so much of my coaching is grounded in self-leadership, because if you can lead yourself effectively in this way that we're talking about right now, the sky's the limit, and beyond. I mean, this is not specific only to,
Yes,
your performance reviews at the
yes.
end of the year. This is everywhere where you're showing up as the leader that you want to be. So I love this. I think this is great. I'm curious. I don't want to shift us a little bit to when you're talking more broadly or when you're working with clients and you're noticing that maybe a culture is off a little bit or there's not this growth minded cultural understanding within the organization, that there's not this culture of learning. And I think sometimes people hear learning and they think sort of knowledge based, and it's not always technical knowledge, but it's learning as in like open mindedness, receptivity, coachability, all of that. How do you have those conversations with leaders?
You know, I spend a lot of time asking questions about how curiosity shows up during their day. Who's asking questions that go beyond exactly what needs to be accomplished or what exactly is within the box of their job description? And how are we creating slash investing in our people to give them transferable skills, particularly now as there's so much uncertainty in the US market right now. And organizations are, in some ways, we're seeing them, they're just cautious and
Mm,
they don't want to make extra costly investments right now in certain areas. And unfortunately, professional development is often an area that gets cut back when business leaders are feeling a little uncertain. But there are free to low cost within your organization opportunities.
mm.
So giving someone a stretch opportunity, tapping someone who may not have been tapped previously, but putting them on a committee, asking them their opinion. If someone attends a meeting or a professional development opportunity, a webinar, hey, at the beginning of your next staff meeting, please present to us 7 minutes, or whatever number of minutes. But I have a
Right.
boss who used to always use
Yeah.
7 minutes.
Yeah.
Um, please give us the 7 minute highlight. Well, you know what you do by doing that? You give someone some presentation opportunities. You let others see them potentially as an expert in areas. You get curiosity going. You show that knowledge can exist at every single level. The most senior person, the most junior person in the room
Yeah.
has something to add.
Yeah.
And so, really, the experience of being curious, the experience of exploring something, being innovative, offering someone an opportunity, investing in them just with a little bit of time or curiosity
Mm.
about, I wish I had another synonym in my head for curiosity, but like, hey, I'm interested in you and what you've learned and what you think is
Yeah.
important. That adds, data shows, you can look at Gallup polls, you can look at other things. Data shows that your interest in someone else's interests, your ability to give them the spotlight is directly correlated to how valued they feel in an organization, which is directly correlated to their engagement, which is directly correlated to their retention.
Yeah.
And so this to me is an equation that there's no downside to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why more leaders, I mean, so many leaders do tap into this, but why more leaders don't deliberately tap into it and make it part of their personal leadership mission. I wish that more really would do it because it just has so many positive outcomes.
Yeah. Oh, I like the way that you described that because I think if anybody's listening to this and they're realizing, oh, I've been thinking of professional development, and I'll come back to this, but professional development as like an add-on that's going to cost money
It's an
and going to
expense.
drain resources and going to take time, you're looking at this the wrong way. Because if it's really a part of your culture, if it's really part of your everyday, there are very low to no cost opportunities, as you described, to infuse this into the way that everybody works together so that you just described. I mean, these do not require that you bring in, a outside firm to come in and do a series of lectures or workshops that cost X thousands of dollars if that's not in the budget at the time. Yes, that could be it. But what I want to go back to is also the distinction between professional development as being one of the things that get cut first, because when I'm having conversations with leaders too, they fixate on this idea of professional development, where it's like this skill building that they can only see it as skill building. Whereas I've started to sort of eliminate the distinction or the label of professional development and just call it development generally,
Yes.
because even the personal development piece of it, the gaining of confidence because you were asked to present for 7 minutes, the ability, yes, there's the presentation skills that you get to hone in on, but there's also the good feeling of this is my moment. I get to go and present in front of this group. There's visibility, there's the confidence building, there's the personal development piece of that comes into play too, that is also developmental and allows them to be a better performer and see opportunities differently and to show up differently. So I like the fact that you're highlighting that this does not always have to be, a new line item in the budget. And it also can be, but I think the thing I'm always telling, clients is especially leaders is seeking to understand before being understood.
Ah, yes.
And
Yes.
leaders feel like they either have all the answers or they have to have all the answers.
No.
And that curiosity that you talked about, and when you were looking for a different word, the word that was bouncing around in my head, which might sound a little like, you know, I don't know, fluffy, it's care.
Yeah,
Like, do you
it
care
is.
about your people? Do you care to learn about them? Do you care to ask questions? Do you care to understand what they like, what they don't like, what they're good at, what they're not good at? Some of the questions that they have for you. Like, if there's that level of care, and care isn't going around hugging everybody in the office, but care is just sort of like that curiosity from a place of like genuine interest. I think that sends a message that that's how we all operate here. And then that kind of bleeds into your culture in such a beautiful way where you start seeing that happening at all levels.
Could we insert chips into everyone's arm to
I
make
know,
them
I know, I know. Well, and this goes back to something I mentioned earlier, and I just sort of brushed by, but the psychological safety, which I think some people will roll their eyes at
is so key.
because they're like, oh God, okay, everyone needs to be cared for, everybody gets a medal. And I'm like, no, that's not what we're talking about. It's like, can people show up with all of who they are and that be okay? Because you referenced this earlier, perspective is so different. Like what I see as stressful may not be stressful for you. What you think is a big deal may not be a big deal for me. And even the example of the way that people are led or managed, what you think might be micromanaging, I might feel completely abandoned by. I follow up with you in 2 days and you're like, geez, you just gave me the task. Why are you following up with me 2 days later? Meanwhile, I've been sitting here for 2 days thinking, why hasn't he followed up? Why hasn't she followed up? Because I've just been left all alone. People's perspectives are so different from person to person that if you aren't curious and asking the questions, how was that for you? Did you want me to check in more? Did you feel
Mhm.
like you got enough support there? Oh, I kind of wish you had checked in the next day. Good. I wasn't sure if you were looking for that level of support, or, okay, good. Now that I know that you want to take this and run with it, and you'll come to me if you have any questions, I'll let you be. That curiosity opens up so much in terms of the learning about one another, but then also learning as a cultural, attribute too.
And the flip side to that also is not everything requires a conversation to be
Hmm.
like, how do you like this? How do you prefer this?
Good point.
Sometimes, as the leader, you do get to say, this is how we're going to do it. But you can make that more successful by being explicit, by
Yes.
being very clear about here's how this is going to run, and here's what you can expect from me so that there aren't questions
Mm,
along the way. If you tell me I'm not going to be available for the next 7 days, I can live with that, even if
right.
I would have wanted you available much more.
Right.
But if you don't tell me and I haven't heard from you for 7 days,
Much
well,
different.
guess
Yeah.
what? I have a very different feeling.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm so
so
glad you called that out. I think that's such an important thing to say because this isn't that, everyone we all have to sit down on the carpet, with our legs
we're
crossed
not
and
singing Kumbaya.
right and hold hands while we look into each other's eyes and ask each other, what do you like? What do you not like? I had a client, it reminds me of who said to me, I know what my problem is. I know what my problem is. I just have too high standards. I realize that. And I remember the conversation we had. It was just this beautiful conversation where I said, no, that's not the problem at all. I think that's fantastic. What I imagine your challenge might be is that you're not being explicit. You're not being clear about the high standards that you have. Because look, at the end of the day, someone can say, this guy's standards are too high. I'm out of here.
Vote with your
Or
feet.
you can say, here are my standards. They may be high, but I have high expectations for what you're capable of doing or what we can do at this organization. Are you in? I'm in. Because it's clear, it's understood. There's an agreement there that now that we understand each other, we can both move forward, with that clearer understanding. But I think you're exactly right that it isn't that you have to consistently defer to or, have these long conversations about it, but having that clarity of self and of who you are as a leader then allows you to have those conversations when you need to, or at least be clear when you're giving directives, if that's the case too.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I'm mindful of time. I could keep having this conversation for easily another 2 hours because there's so much about culture and what learning means to a culture, especially as leaders by example exemplify what a learning culture looks like. But as you think about people who are listening in and thinking about the things we talked about today, what is a skill or attribute that you think they ought to focus on if they want to become better leaders?
Truly, the act of giving timely, meaningful, actionable feedback,
Hmm.
positive and constructive. Taking the time to say to your top performer what you saw, observed, or heard about them doing that was special and talking about it in the specifics helps them to want to repeat that over and over. It's like a child. It is parenting psychology and it is employment psychology.
Hmm.
Tell someone what you really appreciate, and then just to circle back to our development, maybe use that as a test case and say to them, you do this uniquely well. Would you speak for 7 minutes at one of our meetings just about and give this as an example and what you did and how others can do this?
Yeah,
I mean, that is win, win, win.
it is.
And on the flip side, being very specific and actionable about constructive feedback. I observed this. The downstream effect, the ramifications were that. And my expectations for going forward are this. And if you need support in getting there, how do you think you can get there? But we used to of my old colleagues was from New Orleans and used to always talk about making the gumbo. And oh, we're going to throw in some of these spices and some of these spices and some of these spices. Well, that's actually kind of what happens when you're not giving someone feedback.
Yeah.
You're making the gumbo, you're turning up the heat. 3 weeks later, something else happens and you add some more spices. Another couple of weeks later, something else happens and you're adding more spices. And the gumbo is getting spicier and spicier and spicier. But you never even told the person that you were making the gumbo.
Right.
How are they supposed to know?
Yeah.
How are they? None of us actually have, nor does it say in any of our job descriptions, you must be able to read your boss's mind.
Right.
And so, like, let's make the gumbo at a spiciness level where we all can share in the gumbo.
Together.
Just share the
Together. Right.
feedback
Right.
together.
Yeah.
You're not doing anyone any favors by not telling them,
That's right.
because no one has ever changed their behavior or how they're doing something unless they knew that it wasn't the right thing.
Right.
Because most of the time we think we're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Well,
So feedback.
I think that's such a good one. And I'll yes and this one as well, because as I talk about feedback myself, people have a visceral reaction to the idea of positive feedback or negative feedback, or the word you use was constructive. And I often present it as reinforcing or redirecting.
Yes, you know what? I was going to use
And
that language because I often use it also,
yeah,
but so many people are like, wait, I'm not exactly sure what that meant. So I wanted to use terms that I thought
yeah,
were for people, but yes,
yeah,
redirecting or reinforcing 100%. That is the
yeah.
language we should
Yeah, it
always.
doesn't have to be scary. It's just a conversation, and it's either reinforcing something you want to see more of because you love that and you're highlighting that and you're sharing that with the person, or it's a redirecting. I see you chose to go this direction. Tell me about that. Ultimately, I'd like to see us move more towards this direction. Let's
Yes,
redirect. And it's just so valuable. I mean, that talk about low-hanging fruit in terms of development. That's such a great one. Um, can you give us a little bit about where people can find you and get in touch with you and learn more about your HR consulting?
absolutely. So I am pretty active on LinkedIn. You can find me there. You also can check out our webpage, which is just www.platinumconsulting.com. Platinum is spelled with two T's, like my last name. And you can send me an email, rplatt@platinumconsulting.com. I read them all myself. I answer them all myself. And so it's the real deal. Reach out. Let's talk.
Awesome. I will put those links in the show notes too, so anyone who listens in can get all that information in the show notes. Rachel, thank you so much for this conversation. As I said, 40 minutes didn't seem like enough time for us to even get into the various layers and twists and turns that a culture can take, especially when it's not being led by someone as capable and talented as you. And I appreciate you sharing your insights and your experience because these are the conversations that I love to be a part of every day. And I know you do too. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. This just felt like two friends chatting. So thanks. Really fun.
Likewise, I felt the same way. As always, I'd love to hear from you about the episode. What came up for you as you think about leveling up your own leadership game? And please, if you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to like and subscribe. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn at Hakeem A. Lokdar or lockdarcoaching.com. Thanks for tuning in. Keep being great, and we'll see you next time.